December 19th, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Through the swirling snow and morning fog, Oberst Ludwig Brenner pressed his binoculars against his frost-covered goggles, scanning the frozen Ardennes landscape from the commander's cupola of his keen Tiger. The massive 68-ton behemoth represented the pinnacle of German armored engineering, and Brenner knew it. Behind him, 23 more King Tigers from schwere Panzer-Abteilung 506 idled in the tree line, their 88mm guns capable of penetrating any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Herr Oberst, his gunner called up through the intercom. Movement reported on the southern road. American light tanks, possibly Shermans. Brenner allowed himself a thin smile. The Americans had been caught completely by surprise when 3 German armies smashed through the Ardennes 5 days earlier. Their vaunted 3rd Army commander, General George S. Patton, was somewhere to the south, but his forces were scattered, disorganized, desperate. And here, at the critical junction of Bastogne, Brenner's King Tigers would crush whatever remnants tried to break through. "They send Shermans against King Tigers," Brenner muttered to his crew. "The Americans learn nothing. Range? 1,800 meters in closing, Herr Oberst." The German tankers had developed a dark joke about the M4 Sherman. It was a Ronson lighter. Lights first time, every time. The American tank's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a King Tiger's frontal armor even at point-blank range, while the German 88mm could destroy a Sherman from distances the American gun couldn't even reach. The mathematics of armored warfare seemed to promise inevitable German victory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Brenner couldn't know, what no German commander in the Ardennes could have imagined, was that 200 kilometers to the south, something unprecedented in military history was already in motion. In a snow-covered command post near Verdun, George S. Patton had just achieved what military theorists considered impossible, a complete 90-degree pivot of an entire army, turning 3 full divisions north in 48 hours to relieve Bastogne. But this wasn't just a movement of men. This was industrial warfare perfected. American logistics transformed into a weapon more devastating than any gun. The transformation had begun 3 days earlier, on December 16th, when German forces launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, their desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The attack achieved complete tactical surprise, smashing through thinly held American lines and creating a bulge 50 miles deep into Allied territory. At Supreme headquarters, panic spread as commanders realized the Germans had committed their last reserves, 3 armies totaling over 200,000 men and 600 tanks in a massive counteroffensive. On December 19th, Supreme Commander Eisenhower summoned his top generals to Verdun for an emergency conference. The mood was grim. Most commanders spoke of defensive measures, of holding the German breakthrough, of holding until spring when the Allies could rebuild their strength. Then, Patton walked in. "Hell, let's have the guts to let the bastards go all the way to Paris," Patton announced to the shocked room. "Then we'll really cut 'em off and chew 'em up." While others saw disaster, Patton saw opportunity. The Germans had emerged from their prepared defenses. Their supply lines were stretched, their flanks were exposed, they were vulnerable. Eisenhower cut through the bravado. "George, I want you to move to Luxembourg and take command of the battle. When can you attack?" "The morning of December 21st, with 3 divisions. The room fell silent. What Patton was proposing was theoretically impossible. His 3rd Army was engaged in heavy fighting 200 kilometers to the south, attacking toward the Sauer River. To disengage 3 divisions, pivot them 90 degrees, march them through winter conditions on icy roads, and launch a coordinated attack in 48 hours violated every principle of military planning. Division movements were planned weeks in advance. Supply lines needed to be established. Artillery had to be repositioned. Communications had to be reorganized. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, attending by telephone, openly scoffed. "George, I know you're a great showman, but this is impossible. It will take at least 3 weeks to properly position 3 divisions for an offensive." Patton's response would echo through military history. "This time the crowd has stuck his head in a meat grinder." He tapped the map emphatically. "And this time, I've got hold of the handle." What no one in that room fully understood was that Patton's chief of staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, had anticipated this moment. Days earlier, when the German offensive began, Gay had ordered his staff to prepare 3 contingency plans for moving north. Plans coded nickel, dime, and quarter were already drafted, outlining every detail of moving the 4th Armored Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the 80th Infantry Division to 3 different positions around the Bulge. In the 48 hours following the Verdun Conference, American military logistics demonstrated what industrial supremacy meant in modern warfare. Over 133,000 vehicles moved along icy roads in a choreographed ballet of controlled chaos. The 4th Armored Division alone displaced 11,000 vehicles. Every tank, half-track, supply truck, and artillery piece had to be turned north, refueled, rearmed, and redirected. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, later described the movement. "We drove through the night with nothing but blackout lights. The roads were sheets of ice. Vehicles slid off constantly, but we kept moving. Every battalion had orders to leave nothing behind. If a tank threw a track, another tank towed it. If a truck broke down, we pushed it into a ditch and transferred the cargo. We didn't stop. We couldn't stop."
The logistical miracle wasn't just moving the divisions, it was keeping them supplied while moving. The Third Army's supply system, commanded by Colonel Walter Muller, performed calculations that seemed impossible. Abrams' tank battalion alone consumed 5,000 gallons of gasoline per hour of movement. Multiply that by 3 divisions moving simultaneously, and the fuel requirements exceeded 100,000 gallons daily. Add ammunition, food, medical supplies, replacement parts, and winter clothing, and the supply tonnage needed reached staggering levels. But the Americans had prepared for exactly this kind of warfare. The Red Ball Express supply system, refined during the race across France, was reactivated. Hundreds of trucks ran in continuous loops, delivering supplies forward and returning empty for the next load. Fuel dumps were established every 20 miles along the route. Ammunition was pre-positioned at assembly areas. Medical stations were set up at predetermined locations. Captain Raymond Klein, a supply officer with the 80th Division, recalled the chaos. "We were moving supply dumps while the combat units were still drawing from them. Trucks would arrive at a fuel point, pump what they needed, and watch as engineers dismantled the pumps behind them to leapfrog the dump forward. Everything was in motion all the time. It was controlled chaos, but it was controlled. That's what mattered." Meanwhile, Oberst Brenner and his King Tigers remained near Bastogne, confident that German armor superiority would decide any engagement. The King Tiger represented the ultimate expression of German tank design philosophy: heavy armor, powerful gun, superior engineering. Its 88mm KWK-43 L-71 gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where return fire was impossible. Its frontal armor, 180 millimeters thick at the turret face, was essentially impenetrable to American weapons. German tankers had developed supreme confidence in their technical superiority. Unteroffizier Hans Keller, a King Tiger gunner, later wrote in his diary, "The Americans have numbers, but we have quality. One King Tiger is worth 5 of their Shermans. They know this. When they see us, they run. Those who don't run, die. It's simple mathematics." This confidence was grounded in reality. In armored engagements throughout 1944, German heavy tanks had achieved devastating kill ratios. At Villers-Bocage in June, a single Tiger destroyed 14 British tanks in 15 minutes. At St. Vith in December, a small force of King Tigers destroyed over 30 American tanks in 2 days. The technical superiority was undeniable. But technical superiority was about to collide with American operational excellence. On December 22nd, the lead elements of Patton's relieving force made contact with German positions south of Bastogne. These weren't the scattered, demoralized units the Germans expected. These were fresh divisions that had moved 100 miles in 48 hours and arrived ready to fight. The 4th Armored Division, spearheaded by Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion, hit the German positions with coordinated fury. The Americans didn't try to match the King Tigers in one-on-one duels. They couldn't. The Sherman's 75mm gun was hopelessly outmatched. Instead, they employed tactics that turned German strengths into vulnerabilities. While some Shermans engaged the King Tigers frontally, drawing their attention and fire, other Shermans maneuvered on the flanks where German armor was thinner. Tank destroyers with 90mm guns positioned in concealed positions fired on German tanks from the sides and rear. More critically, American artillery, the weapon Patton called the God of War, hammered German positions with precision and overwhelming volume. Forward observers accompanied every tank platoon, calling in fire missions within minutes of receiving coordinates. The 4th Armored Division's artillery battalions could deliver a battalion-sized concentration of fire on any target within 5 minutes of receiving coordinates. This meant German tanks, even mighty King Tigers, couldn't remain in exposed positions without facing devastating artillery fire. Sergeant Bill Davidson, commanding a Sherman in A Company, 37th Tank Battalion, experienced the new reality of armored warfare on December 23rd near the town of Shermans. His platoon encountered 3 King Tigers blocking the road. "We spotted them at about 800 yards, Davidson recalled in a post-war interview. "My gunner put 2 rounds right on the lead tank's frontal armor. Both bounced off like we were throwing rocks. Then the King Tiger's 88 spoke. The tank next to me simply exploded. Just gone. Complete catastrophic kill." Under conventional tactics, Davidson's platoon should have retreated or been destroyed, but this was the new American way of war. Davidson continued, "Our lieutenant was already on the radio. Within 2 minutes, we had artillery falling on those King Tigers. Not just a few shells, I mean hundreds of rounds. Proximity fuses were exploding in the air above them, showering them with shrapnel. They couldn't button up and see, couldn't stay exposed and survive. While the artillery pounded them, 3 of our tank destroyers moved up on the left flank. The King Tigers were completely focused on us, their frontal armor towards us, their thinner side armor exposed. The TDs put 90mm rounds through their sides from 400 yards, all 3 King Tigers burning in under 5 minutes. This pattern repeated across the battlefield. German technical superiority meant nothing when American coordination, communications, and overwhelming firepower created situations where German tanks couldn't leverage their advantages. The King Tigers were designed for long-range duels where their superior gun and armor decided engagements. The Americans refused to fight that battle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Colonel Abrams, pushing toward Bastogne with his tank battalion, employed what was known as Abrams' Thunder Run. Rather than engaging in prolonged firefights, his tanks would smash through German positions at full speed, relying on momentum and aggression to overwhelm defensive positions before the Germans could coordinate effective responses. Behind the lead tanks came infantry and half-tracks, artillery observers, and tank destroyers, all working in perfect coordination. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, Abrams' battalion made contact with German forces just 4 miles south of Bastogne. Among those forces was Oberst Brenner's King Tigers, positioned to block the American advance. Brenner still believed in the mathematical certainty of German armored superiority. "Let them come," he told his company commanders over the radio. "We will destroy them at range and break their spirit." What Brenner didn't understand was spirit. American determination had become a weapon as potent as any gun. Abrams, receiving reports of heavy armor ahead, didn't hesitate. "We're going through," he told his battalion. "Maximum speed, no stopping. If you see it, shoot it. If you can't shoot it, run it over. We're getting to Bastogne tonight."
The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for decades as a textbook example of combined arms warfare defeating superior technology through coordination and will. Abrams' lead company, commanded by Captain William Dwight, encountered Brenner's King Tigers at 15:30 hours on Christmas Eve. The initial exchange seemed to confirm German confidence. 2 Shermans exploded within seconds as 88mm rounds found their marks at 1,200 meters. But then the American system, the industrial, logistical, and tactical system that had been refined through years of warfare, engaged with devastating effect. Artillery observers with the lead tanks immediately called for fire. Within 3 minutes, American 155mm howitzers positioned 5 miles to the rear began dropping shells on the German positions. Not random fire, but precisely coordinated concentrations based on reports from forward observers who could see the King Tigers' positions. Simultaneously, American fighter bombers appeared overhead. The weather had cleared briefly, allowing P-47 Thunderbolts from the 19th Tactical Air Command to reach the battlefield. These weren't the same P-47s that Luftwaffe pilots had mocked 2 years earlier. These were battle-proven ground attack aircraft carrying 500-pound bombs and rockets, flown by experienced pilots who had perfected the art of close air support. Captain James Howard, leading a flight of 4 Thunderbolts, received target coordinates from the ground controllers within minutes of Abrams' tanks making contact. "We came in from the east, low and fast," Howard later reported. The King Tigers were clearly visible in the snow, these massive dark shapes. "We put rockets and bombs right into their positions. I don't know if we destroyed any tanks, those things are tough, but we sure as hell disrupted their coordination." For Oberst Brenner, the carefully planned defensive engagement was dissolving into chaos. His King Tigers could handle American tanks at range. They couldn't handle artillery, aircraft, and tanks simultaneously. The American aerial observer was directing artillery with precision that seemed impossible. Shells were landing within meters of his tanks, forcing crews to button up, reducing visibility and situational awareness. The smoke and explosions prevented effective long-range gunnery. And through this maelstrom, American tanks kept coming. "They don't stop," Brenner's gunner reported, his voice showing strain. "We destroy 1, 2 more up here. We hit them, they keep advancing. Herr Oberst, they're inside 800 meters. At 800 meters, the engagement dynamics changed. The Sherman's 75mm gun still couldn't reliably penetrate a King Tiger's frontal armor, but it could damage external equipment, optics, and tracks. More importantly, at that range, American tank destroyers could find angles where their 90mm guns could penetrate. And the Americans were firing constantly, not aimed shots, but suppressive fire designed to force German crews to button up and maneuver defensively. Sergeant Davidson, the Sherman commander who had survived the earlier encounter, was with the lead company now. "We weren't trying to kill them head-on anymore. We were just hitting them with everything we had, keeping them rattled while our TDs moved into position. I put 15 rounds into 1 King Tiger's frontal armor in less than a minute. Everyone bounced off, but the crew couldn't acquire targets with 75mm rounds slamming into their vision blocks every few seconds." The real killing blow came from an unexpected direction. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, commanding an M36 tank destroyer with a 90mm gun, had maneuvered his vehicle into a wooded position on the German flank. From 600 yards at a 45-degree angle, Poole's gunner could see the King Tiger's side armor, thinner than the frontal plate and vulnerable to the M36's gun. Poole's combat report was clinical. First round, penetration, left side hull, target brewing up. Second target, adjusting fire, penetration amidships, catastrophic kill. Third target, attempting to turn, shot at turret ring, turret jammed, crew bailing out. In less than 3 minutes, Poole's single tank destroyer had destroyed or disabled 3 King Tigers worth over $1 million in 1944 currency. This wasn't the decisive battle that broke the German defense. It was the pattern that would repeat dozens of times over the next week. German tactical excellence and technical superiority were being systematically negated by American operational coordination. Every German strength was countered, superior range negated by artillery and air support, heavy armor circumvented by maneuver and flank attacks, individual tank quality overwhelmed by coordinated combined arms tactics. By December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division had broken through to Bastogne, ending the siege. But the breakthrough was just the beginning. Patton's 3 divisions, now reinforced by additional units, began systematically crushing the German salient from the south, while other Allied forces attacked from the north and west. The Germans, who had advanced with confidence, now found themselves trapped in a shrinking pocket with their supply lines under constant attack. The logistical asymmetry became brutally apparent. American tanks that ran out of fuel could be resupplied within hours. German tanks ran dry and were abandoned. American tanks that were damaged could be recovered and repaired by mobile maintenance units that accompanied every combat formation. German tanks, once disabled, were lost permanently. American casualties could be evacuated by dedicated medical units and often returned to combat. German wounded often froze to death awaiting evacuation that never came. Lieutenant Karl Schnitt, a company commander in Brenner's battalion, captured the German experience in a letter recovered after his capture. "We are fighting ghosts. We destroy their tanks, and tomorrow there are more. We advance, and their artillery finds us instantly. We defend, and they call down fire from the sky. We damage their machines, and mechanics appear within hours to repair them. When our machines break, and they break constantly in this cold, there are no parts, no fuel, no hope. We have better tanks. They have better everything else." The better everything else was American industrial and logistical supremacy manifested as battlefield dominance. For every tank the Americans lost, factories in Detroit were building 2 more. For every gallon of fuel consumed, tankers were delivering 10 more. For every artillery shell fired, manufacturers were producing 20 more. The German war machine stretched tightly across multiple fronts and, devastated by Allied strategic bombing, couldn't match this industrial output. Colonel Abrams, pushing deeper into the German positions, encountered Oberst Brenner's remaining King Tigers on December 28th near the town of Bougainville. Brenner had 7 operational tanks left from his original 24. They were nearly out of fuel, low on ammunition, and completely cut off from supply. Abrams had 40 operational Shermans, unlimited artillery support, and air superiority. The engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. American artillery plastered the German positions. Fighter bombers struck German assembly areas. Tank destroyers engaged from favorable positions. And through it all, Sherman tanks, individually inferior but collectively overwhelming, pressed the attack with relentless aggression. 6 of Brenner's remaining King Tigers were destroyed or abandoned. Brenner himself was captured when his disabled tank ran out of ammunition. In the POW collection point, American intelligence officers interviewed Brenner. One officer noted in his report, "The German colonel seemed genuinely perplexed by his defeat. He insisted repeatedly that German tanks were superior, that German tactics were sound, that German soldiers fought bravely. He couldn't understand how technical superiority had led to operational defeat. When informed that the Americans had moved 3 full divisions 100 miles in 48 hours to reach Bastogne, he initially refused to believe it. Impossible, he stated. Such a movement requires weeks of planning. What Brenner and the German High Command failed to grasp was that American warfare had evolved beyond individual technical excellence into something far more formidable: systemic superiority. Every component of the American war machine, from factories in Detroit to supply depots in France to frontline combat units, functioned as an integrated system designed for sustained industrial warfare. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. During the Battle of the Bulge, American forces lost approximately 733 tanks and tank destroyers. By January 15th, all but 67 had been replaced. New tanks were arriving in Europe at a rate of over 1,000 per month. German tank production, meanwhile, had fallen to fewer than 300 per month across all models, and many of those never reached combat units due to fuel shortages and Allied air interdiction of rail networks. The maintenance disparity was equally stark. The U.S. Third Army's maintenance system could repair and return to service 60 to 70% of damaged tanks within 48 hours. Mobile maintenance companies accompanied combat units, carrying spare parts, welding equipment, and replacement engines. Tank retrieval units with specialized recovery vehicles could extract damaged tanks from battlefields under fire. The entire system was designed around the assumption that American tanks would be damaged but could be restored to service quickly. German maintenance, by contrast, had collapsed. Spare parts were allocated based on Nazi Party connections rather than military need. Recovery vehicles were in short supply. Skilled mechanics had been drafted into combat units to replace infantry casualties. When a German tank was disabled, it was usually lost permanently. Even minor mechanical issues often resulted in abandonment as units retreated without maintenance support. Fuel told perhaps the most devastating story. The American Third Army consumed approximately 250,000 gallons of gasoline daily during offensive operations. This fuel was transported by a dedicated supply system, stockpiled in forward dumps, and distributed through an efficient allocation system that ensured combat units never ran dry. The famous Red Ball Express, which had supplied the armies racing across France, was reactivated specifically to support Patton's relief of Bastogne. Germany, meanwhile, was experiencing a critical fuel crisis. The loss of Romanian oil fields to Soviet advances and the systematic Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants had reduced German fuel production to a trickle. Panzer divisions were allocated fuel for specific operations and then immobilized when that fuel was exhausted. During the Ardennes offensive, German units literally ran out of fuel within sight of their objectives, their sophisticated tanks becoming stationary pillboxes before being abandoned. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army during the offensive, later wrote, "We didn't lose the Ardennes offensive in combat. We lost it at the fuel pumps. Our tanks were superior, our tactics were sound, our soldiers were brave. But when American tanks ran dry, fuel trucks appeared within hours. When our tanks ran dry, they became monuments to our failure. Industrial capacity decided the battle before the first shot was fired." The human dimension of this logistical supremacy was equally profound. American soldiers, even in frontline combat units, received hot meals regularly. Mobile kitchens accompanied combat formations. When units were pulled off the line for rest, they were fed steak, received clean uniforms, could attend movie screenings, and had access to mail from home. This sustained morale even during intense combat. Private First Class James Wright, serving with the 26th Infantry Division during the Bulge, recalled, "We were fighting in brutal conditions, freezing cold, constant combat. But even at the front, we got 2 hot meals most days. We received our mail. Chaplains held services. The medics were right there when someone got hit. You knew the system was supporting you. That's hard to explain, but it mattered. You weren't alone out there." German soldiers, by contrast, were increasingly isolated. Supply breakdowns meant units went days without rations. Medical evacuation was sporadic or non-existent. Mail service had collapsed. Replacements were poorly trained. A German Wehrmacht soldier by late 1944 fought with the growing certainty that he was part of a dying system that could no longer support him. Lieutenant Schmidt, captured near Bastogne, told his interrogators, "We knew we were losing when we stopped receiving mail, when the rations became irregular, when wounded men couldn't be evacuated, when ammunition was rationed. The Americans had everything. We had nothing but courage, and courage without logistics is just slow death." By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was decisively over.
German forces had been pushed back to their starting positions, having lost over 600 tanks and assault guns, 1,600 aircraft, and approximately 120,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. They had achieved none of their objectives and had sacrificed their last operational reserves in the attempt. The Ardennes offensive, intended as a knockout blow, had instead become the death blow to German military capability in the West. The Americans' secret weapon wasn't a new tank or airplane. It was the ability to move, supply, and coordinate massive forces with a speed and efficiency that redefined operational warfare. Patton's 90-degree pivot of 3 divisions in 48 hours was militarily impossible by every conventional standard. Yet it happened because American logistics, planning, and communications had evolved to a level that made the impossible routine. The statistical comparison was overwhelming. American forces in the Ardennes, 610,000 men, 1,400 tanks. German forces, 500,000 men, 600 tanks. American casualties, 89,000, replaceable within weeks. German casualties, 120,000, irreplaceable. American tank losses, 733, replaced within days. German tank losses, 600 plus, irreplaceable. American fuel consumption, 2 million plus gallons, sustained throughout. German fuel supply, critical shortage, operations halted mid-battle. But numbers alone don't capture the transformation that had occurred. The German military, which had pioneered blitzkrieg and dominated Europe through tactical excellence and operational audacity, had been defeated not by superior tactics or braver soldiers, but by an opponent who had transformed warfare into an industrial process. The Americans had proven that in modern war, the factory, the supply depot, and the maintenance company were as important as the battlefield. Major General Manton Eddy, commanding 12th Corps under Patton, captured this reality in a letter to his wife. "We've learned something the Germans never understood. Modern war isn't won by the best tanks or the bravest soldiers. It's won by the side that can put adequate tanks in the field, keep them supplied, repair them when they break, and replace them when they're lost. Excellence is meaningless without sustainability. The Germans built magnificent machines they couldn't sustain. We built adequate machines we could build by the thousands. They out-engineered us. We outproduced them. In industrial war, production wins." The tactical and operational lessons of the Bulge spread rapidly through both armies. For the Americans, it validated everything they had learned about combined arms coordination and logistical warfare. For the Germans, it confirmed their worst fears, that technical superiority was meaningless against an opponent who could absorb losses, replace casualties, and sustain operations indefinitely. The psychological impact on German armored forces was profound. Throughout 1943 and early 1944, German tank crews had maintained confidence based on their technical edge. A Tiger or King Tiger crew knew they could destroy multiple enemy tanks before being threatened. This confidence sustained morale even as the strategic situation deteriorated. The Bulge shattered that confidence. Oberst Brenner, in extended interrogations after his capture, revealed the depth of German demoralization. "We were told our King Tigers were invincible. We believed it because it was true. Individually, our tanks were superior. But what good is an invincible tank that has no fuel? What use is superior armor when enemy artillery prevents you from using your gun? What value is a 2-kilometer engagement range when the enemy attacks with aircraft, artillery, and coordinated ground assault simultaneously? We had the best tanks in the world. The Americans had the best army in the world. There is a difference, and we learned it too late." This sentiment rippled through the German armored forces. Reports from German units in early 1945 showed a marked decline in aggressive action. Panzer commanders became increasingly defensive, husbanding their precious tanks rather than committing them to offensives where they might be destroyed without replacement. The psychological transformation from hunters to hunted was complete. American forces, meanwhile, pressed their advantage with increasing sophistication.
The lessons learned in the Ardennes were systemized and disseminated. Tank battalions received updated tactical guidance emphasizing coordination with artillery and air support. Combined arms teams, tanks, infantry, tank destroyers, artillery, and engineers working in integrated formations became the standard operational unit. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams exemplified this new American way of war. In the months following the Bulge, his tank battalion pioneered tactics that would influence armored warfare for decades. His thunder runs, rapid advances that bypass strong points rather than reducing them, demonstrated that speed and momentum could substitute for overwhelming local superiority. His emphasis on 24-hour operations, with units fighting in shifts while maintaining continuous pressure, gave Americans an operational tempo the Germans couldn't match. During the drive into Germany in March 1945, Abrams' battalion covered over 100 miles in 48 hours, a rate of advance that seemed impossible for heavy armored forces. The secret wasn't superior tanks, it was superior support. Fuel trucks accompanied the combat formations. Maintenance teams repaired vehicles while moving. Artillery displaced forward continuously to maintain support. The entire battalion functioned as an integrated mobile system designed for sustained high-speed operations. On March 22, 1945, Abrams tankers reached the Rhine River at Oppenheim, becoming one of the first American units to reach Germany's last major defensive barrier. Behind them lay 200 miles of conquered territory, dozens of defeated German units, and the wreckage of hundreds of German vehicles that had run out of fuel, broken down, or been abandoned. The advance had been so rapid that German defenders were often overrun before they could establish coherent defensive positions. General Patton, always theatrical, urinated in the Rhine upon reaching it, a symbolic gesture that captured American confidence. "I've been waiting to do that since 1918, he announced. But the real victory wasn't symbolic. It was the brutal arithmetic of industrial warfare. American forces could move faster, fight longer, and sustain operations at a tempo that exhausted German defenders who lacked fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. The Rhine crossing itself demonstrated how completely American operational art had matured. While Field Marshal Montgomery to the north spent weeks accumulating supplies and conducting elaborate preparations for his Rhine crossing, Patton's Third Army crossed with forces that had been in sustained combat, using pre-positioned bridging equipment that had traveled with combat units. Within 24 hours, engineer battalions had constructed pontoon bridges capable of supporting heavy tank traffic. Major General John Milliken, commanding 3 Corps during the crossing, noted in his after-action report, "The Germans expected us to pause at the Rhine, to rest and refit. Instead, we crossed within hours of reaching the river. Our logistics system had anticipated this moment. Bridge companies were positioned forward. Fuel dumps were established on our side of the river. Artillery was registered on the far bank before infantry crossed. The Germans were still preparing defenses when we were already across and advancing. Speed became its own form of firepower." The contrast with German capabilities was stark. By March 1945, German forces were incapable of sustained mobile operations. Fuel shortages meant counterattacks were limited in scope and duration. Artillery ammunition was severely rationed. Air support was non-existent. The Luftwaffe had been destroyed by American industrial might, with Allied aircraft production exceeding German output by a ratio exceeding 10-1. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, a veteran panzer commander who had fought in North Africa, France, and Russia, was captured in April 1945 during the reduction of the Ruhr Pocket. His interrogation provided stark insight into German thinking. "We lost the war in the factories. Every battle we fought, we knew the Americans would return stronger tomorrow. We destroyed their tanks, they built more. We shot down their aircraft, more appeared. We killed their soldiers, replacements arrived. Meanwhile, our losses were permanent. By 1945, we were fighting with teenagers and old men using captured weapons because we had no domestic production, burning wood gas in vehicles because we had no fuel. The Americans thought they won through superior tactics. They're wrong. They won because they could lose 100 times and return stronger. We could lose once and never recover. The final offensive into Germany saw American armored columns advancing at rates that exceeded even the German blitzkrieg of 1940. In April 1945, American forces were covering 30 to 40 miles per day across multiple fronts. This wasn't reckless advance. It was calculated operational movement supported by sophisticated logistics. Mobile supply columns kept pace with combat units. Fuel was stockpiled at advanced depots before units reached them. Maintenance facilities leapfrogged forward, positioning themselves ahead of the advance to handle inevitable breakdowns. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, the tank destroyer ace who had destroyed 3 King Tigers during the Bulge, survived the war with a remarkable record. 258 enemy vehicles destroyed, including 12 tanks on a single day during the drive through Germany. His success wasn't individual prowess. It was the product of a system that put him in position to engage targets, supplied him with ammunition, supported him with infantry and artillery, and extracted him when his vehicle was damaged. 5 times during the war, each time his crew received a replacement vehicle within 24 hours. In a post-war interview, Poole reflected on his experience. People ask how I killed so many enemy vehicles. The answer is simple. I was never alone. I had infantry to spot targets, artillery to suppress enemy positions, air support when needed, ammunition trucks that found me when I ran low, and mechanics who kept my TD running. The Germans had individual heroes. We had a system. Systems beat heroes every time. By late April 1945, organized German resistance was collapsing. American forces advancing from the west linked up with Soviet forces advancing from the east. The Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, fell to American forces, capturing more than 300,000 German troops, more than had surrendered at Stalingrad. The speed of the American advance had prevented German forces from establishing coherent defensive positions. The Battle of the Bulge had been Germany's last gamble, their final attempt to use tactical excellence and technical superiority to change the strategic balance. They had failed not because their tanks were inferior or their soldiers less brave, but because they faced an opponent who had transformed warfare from an art into an industrial process. Every element of American military power, procurement, training, logistics, maintenance, medical care, replacement systems functioned with an efficiency that multiplied the effectiveness of individual soldiers and weapons. General Dwight Eisenhower, reflecting on the European campaign, identified logistics as the decisive factor. He said, "The war was won in Detroit, in the Gulf of Mexico shipyards, in the training camps of America, and in the supply depots of Europe before a single shot was fired in anger. Our soldiers were brave and our tactics sound, but what truly defeated Germany was our ability to project and sustain overwhelming force across an ocean and a continent. The Germans pioneered modern mobile warfare, but they never understood that mobile warfare requires mobile logistics. They could sustain operations for weeks. We could sustain operations indefinitely. That difference decided everything."
The numbers from the entire European campaign supported Eisenhower's assessment. American production and deployment. Tanks, 88,410 built during the war, 15,000 plus deployed to Europe. Military trucks, 2.4 million produced. Artillery pieces, 257,000 produced. Combat aircraft, 324,000 produced. Liberty ships, 2,710 built to transport material to Europe. Petroleum products, 7 billion barrels refined during the war. Ammunition, 41 billion rounds of small arms ammunition, 49 million artillery shells. German production, 1944 to 1945. Tanks, approximately 8,000 total, all types, all fronts. Fuel production, 75% destroyed by Allied bombing. Artillery production, severely limited by raw material shortages. Transportation network, destroyed by strategic bombing. Replacement training, collapsed due to fuel and aircraft shortages. The disparity wasn't just quantitative, it was qualitative in terms of sustainability. American weapons were designed for mass production and field maintenance. The M4 Sherman, often criticized for being inferior to German tanks, was actually a masterpiece of industrial design. Relatively simple to build, 8,000 man-hours versus 30,000 for a King Tiger. Easy to maintain, engine could be replaced in hours rather than days, and cheap enough to produce in overwhelming numbers. $44,000 per unit versus $300,000 for a King Tiger.
The final accounting of American logistical supremacy came in the months after Germany's surrender. Intelligence teams surveyed German industrial facilities and captured Wehrmacht records, piecing together a comprehensive picture of why Germany lost. The findings were sobering for German generals who had attributed their defeat to bad luck or Hitler's interference. The records showed that German tank production had peaked at 1,669 units in December 1944, an impressive figure until compared to American production of 2,428 tanks that same month, or Soviet production of 1,500 tanks, or British production of 500 tanks. Germany faced 3 opponents, each of whom could outproduce them individually. Combined, the Allied tank production advantage was approximately 4-1. More revealing were the operational readiness figures. In March 1945, Germany had approximately 1,500 tanks in inventory on the Western Front. Only 300 were operationally ready due to fuel shortages, mechanical failures, and lack of spare parts. Of those 300, perhaps 100 had sufficient fuel and ammunition for sustained combat operations. The Americans, facing these forces, had over 4,000 operational tanks in Europe, all adequately fueled and supplied. The maintenance disparity told an even more damning story. American maintenance records showed that 60–70% of tanks damaged in combat were repaired and returned to service within 48 to 72 hours. German records showed repair rates of less than 20%, with most damaged tanks either cannibalized for parts or abandoned. An American tank had a life expectancy of multiple engagements. A German tank was typically lost in its first or second battle. Fuel consumption illustrated the impossible situation Germany faced. The American Third Army alone consumed more fuel in the final months of the war than the entire Wehrmacht had available for all fronts combined. Patton's tanks could advance, maneuver, and fight continuously because fuel trucks accompanied every movement. German tanks advanced until their fuel was exhausted, then became stationary targets or were abandoned. Perhaps most revealing was the ammunition comparison. American artillery units could, and did, fire dozens of rounds per gun per day throughout sustained operations. German artillery was rationed to a few rounds per day due to production shortages and transportation limitations. This meant American forces could call for massive fire support routinely, while German forces used artillery sparingly and primarily for defensive fires. The human dimension completed the picture. American soldiers received extensive training before deployment, typically 6 to 9 months of basic and advanced training. German soldiers by 1945 were receiving 4 to 6 weeks of training before being sent to frontline units. American casualties could be replaced quickly from a pipeline of trained personnel. German casualties created gaps in units that were filled with inadequately trained replacements or not filled at all. Medical care showed similar disparities. American wounded had access to sophisticated medical evacuation systems. Dedicated ambulances and medical aircraft could evacuate casualties from frontline aid stations to field hospitals in hours, then to general hospitals in days. Penicillin and other antibiotics were available in quantity. Blood plasma was routinely administered. Survival rates for American wounded exceeded 95%.
German wounded often received minimal treatment and died from wounds that would have been survivable with adequate medical care. Medical supplies were chronically short. Evacuation systems had collapsed. Morphine and other pain medications were in such short supply that seriously wounded soldiers often received nothing for pain. The psychological impact on German soldiers, knowing that a wound might mean death from lack of medical care, was devastating. In June 1945, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed captured German industrial planners and military commanders. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, provided perhaps the most comprehensive explanation of German defeat. We lost the war in 1942 when America entered with its full industrial might. Everything after that was merely delaying the inevitable. We could not match American production. We lacked the resources, the factories, the workers, the raw materials, and most critically, the time. Every German tank destroyed was gone forever. Every American tank destroyed was replaced within days. This is not warfare in any traditional sense. This is industrial suffocation, being buried under an avalanche of material we could not match nor counter. General Heinz Guderian, one of the architects of German Blitzkrieg doctrine, was even more direct in his assessment. We created modern mobile warfare, but we failed to understand its logistical requirements. Mobile warfare requires mobile logistics. We could move our forces brilliantly for short campaigns, but we could not sustain operations over time and distance. The Americans learned from our tactics, then exceeded us by building a logistics system that could sustain those tactics indefinitely. They didn't defeat our doctrine. They perfected it by adding the one element we never mastered: sustainable logistics. The final vindication of American operational methods came not from military analysts, but from an unexpected source: Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov. In his memoirs, published in 1969, Zhukov wrote, "When people ask who won World War II, they think of soldiers and battles. But the war was won by American factories, American trucks, and American logistics. Without American Lend-Lease, the trucks, the food, the fuel, the locomotives, the Soviet Union would have been hard-pressed to defeat Germany. The Americans didn't just supply us with weapons. They taught us that modern war is won by the side that can sustain operations longer, replace losses faster, and maintain higher operational tempo. This lesson, that logistics is strategy, transformed warfare forever." George Patton didn't live to see these assessments. He died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a vehicle accident. But his operational philosophy, aggressive action sustained by sophisticated logistics, became doctrine for American armored forces. His belief that speed and momentum could substitute for local superiority, that logistics should enable tactics rather than constrain them, and that sustained operational tempo could shatter enemy cohesion, revolutionized armored warfare. The Battle of the Bulge, which began with German confidence in their tactical and technical superiority, ended with complete German defeat and demonstrated conclusively that modern warfare had evolved beyond individual battles. It had become a contest of systems: production systems, logistics systems, maintenance systems, replacement systems. Germany had built a military designed to win battles. America had built a military designed to win wars. In 1987, at a military history symposium in Heidelberg, Germany, historians and veterans from both sides gathered to discuss the Battle of the Bulge. Among the attendees was Hans Keller, the former King Tiger gunner who had written so confidently about German technical superiority in his 1944 diary. Asked to reflect on the battle from 4 decades' distance, Keller's response captured the complete transformation of understanding. "We entered the Ardennes believing our tanks were invincible and our tactics were sound. We were correct on both counts. Our tanks were technically better and our tactical doctrine was sound. But we lost anyway, and we lost decisively. It took me many years to understand why.
The Americans didn't beat us with better tanks or better tactics. They beat us with something we never had and never understood: the ability to sustain modern warfare indefinitely. Every day we grew weaker, less fuel, fewer replacements, declining morale. Every day they grew stronger, more supplies, more reinforcements, higher confidence. By the end, we weren't fighting American soldiers. We were fighting American industrial capacity, and you cannot kill a factory with a tank gun. The legacy of Patton's relief of Bastogne and the subsequent destruction of German armored forces in the Bulge extended far beyond World War II. American military doctrine for the next 70 years would emphasize operational-level logistics, the integration of combat and support functions, and the understanding that sustained operational tempo is itself a weapon. The lesson learned in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, that wars are won by systems, not just soldiers, became foundational to American military thinking. The secret order Patton received at Verdun wasn't just to move 3 divisions. It was to prove that American operational art had matured to the point where the impossible was routine, where logistics enabled tactics rather than constraining them, and where industrial might translated directly into battlefield dominance. The Germans had laughed at American tanks, mocked American tactical doctrine, and dismissed American operational capabilities.
They stopped laughing when American firepower, mobility, and sustainability shattered their last great offensive and demonstrated that the future of warfare belonged to the side that could sustain operations, not just win battles. In the end, the King Tigers that had seemed so invincible in December 1944 became symbols not of German superiority, but of German failure. Magnificent machines rendered impotent by lack of fuel, overwhelmed by coordinated combined arms warfare, and defeated by an opponent who understood that modern war is won in factories and supply depots as much as on battlefields. The thunder that echoed through the Ardennes wasn't just the sound of artillery and tank guns. It was the thunder of American industrial might, and it signaled the end of Germany's war. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.